Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the National Conference on Tribal Policies. Our session today is on natural resources management. I now invite the chair, Dr. Professor Rashir Prasad, Department of Anthropology, University of Hyderabad, and the speakers to the dais.
Thank you very much. So Felix is reduce that, or you put the mic off, their mic, that mic. Put it off. This mic should be off.
That's all.
You put that off. Echo is because of that. I think this is a small room. I'm audible. Today we have two kind of presentations. One, Abhik is going to talk about remodeling the tribal economy, small scale practices and large scale policies. He's going to discuss something relating to economy and policies and how they need to be structured. That's what I suppose the focus would be on. It's wonderful. And Felix is going to talk about what's going to happen to the future generations with regard to natural resources in tribal areas. I think these two are going to be the presentations today. And which one? Shall I? Abhik? Abhik, you want to present first or you? We have, the time is from 9:30 to 11, if I'm not mistaken. I think in that case, what we have to do is half an hour, maybe, or around 20-25 minutes, each presentation will have, and the discussions will have another 10 minutes each. And
I'll try and keep it short.
yes, yeah, so that we can have participation a little larger. Thank you, Felix.
So, Honourable Chairman and distinguished people who are here, I feel very honoured to be here. And as people were saying yesterday, I think it's just reformulating tribal policy is incredibly important, but finding a consensus is also very important. So what I'm going to talk about here is partly that tribal policy cannot be looked at in isolation, because if you look at the natural resources in the areas where they live, and we all know a large part of the country's minerals, water sources, forests, prime land and everything is in those areas. You know, those policies, of course, a lot of money is at stake. So there's a huge amount of, we use the term cost-benefit analysis, but actually there's a very profound kind of balancing act to look at in terms of both the environment and the tribal communities, that the impact of the industrialization, when it comes in a mindless way, is just very, very strong. So in a way, in all of the talk about tribal policy yesterday, What we've avoided is this key issue. Policy on use of environment and natural resources affects tribal policy implicitly. Huge sums of investment for mining and minerals tend to be considered far more important than tribal communities are, and also more important than preserving the ecosystems that support life on Earth. So that is why the future generations is not just tribal future generations, it's future generations of all of us. Citizens of India, world citizens, we are destroying the planet we live on. You know, this is a truism that we need to understand more and more deeply, really. If you look at just at water, and this is 4 aspects of water, India's groundwater levels have dropped catastrophically since the water mining that became normal with the Green Revolution. If you look at the state of Punjab, the state of diseases, the state of toxics, the depth of water has fallen, it's unbelievable, the real statistics. Of course, hundreds of dams have stopped the natural flow of India's main rivers, and especially the dams are used for the metal industry. Factory pollution has transformed many rivers, making them undrinkable. We're talking about development, we're talking about transformation, but what we've got is actually also a process of de-development. Our rivers are being de-developed. Yes, developed for industrial, economic purposes, but as rivers of fresh, clean, oxygen-rich water, we have really damaged them. So we need to understand that kind of dual process. And finally, the impact of mining on water is not taken into account by most people. So when you mine a mountain, the mountain, Adivasis often say, like, for example, the Khans in Orissa said, Hamara devata hai pahar. I mean, they are Hindu, they are not Hindu, you know, they worship Jagannath, Shiva, they consider those deities theirs, but above all they have Niyamgiri and similar deities on the mountains. So what they mean is something actually scientific, it's not just superstitious, that they understand that the water that's coming from the mountains, maybe they don't know about bauxite. So if you know about bauxite, which is the ore for aluminium, it has this capacity for holding water in suspension at the top of mountains. And so it's a source for, especially in North Andhra Pradesh and South Orissa, for many of the area's biggest rivers, they start from there. So when you mine the mountain, as for example we'll see later, Panchpat Mali, Nalco's India's biggest bauxite mine, the mountain is no longer a source of water. The monsoon rain falls, water comes straight off, and it's no longer a source of rivers, and the land around is like a desert. So huge things to take into account just about water usage. And then it involves these profound questions, like in the last weeks of his life, Gandhi tried to have this dialogue with Nehru. Is the Western model of development leading to collective suicide? If India follows this Western model of development, is there any point in independence? Or after independence, he really asked the question, is India really independent at all? Or is the economic policy being controlled by the World Bank, the IMF, and big corporations who are multinationals? This is the abstract I wrote. From Niyamgiri and Polavaram to struggles over dams and oil in the northeast, and over coal and minerals in many areas, tribal movements against environmentally devastating projects are often seen as anti-development or even anti-national. But on the other hand, many people see them as a vital safeguard for the well-being of India's citizens and the ecosystems that support us all, now and in future. So 3 questions here. Is it ecological romanticism to view traditional tribal economics as founded on long-term sustainability through restraint in what is taken from nature? I've, in a way, in my most recent book, talked about Adivasi economics as founded on principles of ecology. And so, to me, you know, this is a very important question. And I don't think it's ecological romanticism at all. It's very fashionable among Marxists as well as the mainstream to just dismiss romanticization of tribals. Of course, what the police officer was saying yesterday, romanticization from Maoist is something else. I don't think any of us should be doing that. Second question, is the whole idea that the Maoist conflict is a class war basically a smokescreen promoted by both sides like an ideological conflict, concealing the classic conflict over resources that is going on in tribal areas, where, as in every resource war, both sides are funded by international investment based on a loot of unrenewable resources. If you look at the Maoists, so many reports have shown they also get their tax or protection money from the mining companies. So what is really going on? And then they call themselves after Mao. Mao's biggest policy was the Great Leap Forward, which was enforced steel production from 1958, which caused the world's worst famine. So you could even say India has a Maoist steel policy. So how are the, you know, the two sides seem to be on opposite sides because strategically the Maoists always support Adivasi movements against mining, but actually you will never get a real critique of mining from the Maoists. As long as they call themselves after Mao, it's impossible. So a question of priorities haunts tribal policy. Is the revenue from mining projects, and of course the profit for companies, really of greater value than the communities and ecosystems that are being destroyed? This is my last book, so the first chapter, a balancing act between people and profit, and how the root meanings of ecology and economy, that they mean almost the same thing. They mean a balanced use of resources, basically. But of course, economy has come to be much more profit-oriented. And then the second chapter is Adivasi economics. In many ways, indigenous societies based their economy on ecological principles through a system of restraint in what is taken from nature, which you see in the kind of pujas when they, the first time I went to an Adivasi village, somebody was offering me a crop from his land. And I said, so why don't you take it? It's ripe. He said, nahi, hum puja nahi kiya. And it's the same towards forest products, and that's why they allow a lot of regeneration. I mean, profound systems, that's very, very highly developed systems are being destroyed. That's why when we call them backwards or primitive or something, it's not just cultural racism, it's really a very, very profound mistake in not seeing the ways. Of course we know the ways we are more developed than them, but there are so many more ways they are more developed than us, and we're destroying it, or our economic system is. This is Niyamgiri. A lot of you will know I've done a lot of work there. This is the sacred symbol. It's like yin-yang, the symbol of the mountains and the water. This is a Dongria temple. This is a shaman. My co-author made this film, and she allowed herself to be photographed as she was coming out of trance. And I like this photo because she's looking directly at us, at the future generations, going into other dimensions. Shamanism is not just superstition, to put it in a few words. It's well established that tribal people live close to nature, in symbiosis with nature, depending on it, with vast knowledge of it, with a religion based on restraint in what's taken from it, a value system of living in harmony with the forest and natural elements. This is three things that Adivasi friends, I heard them say. This is Lado Sikaka, one of the Dongria leaders. People say, Logo ko chanti kete kotia tonka achi amara nyangari upre. Agya tonka nei amara ma bap achi. Amko arakia dorkar achi. It's like saying this. People say there's crores of rupees up there. If you read an Oriya textbook, Orissa is the poorest state in India, but it's one of the richest in minerals. All we have to do, mine the minerals, Orissa will be the richest state in India. It's like such a distortion because the mining industry never works like that. It leaves devastated areas and the profits are never shared. The 2% that is coming to community is top down, and we can talk about that, but CSR in many ways is highly orchestrated and coordinated with the PR industry. This is Bhagwan Maji, one of the leaders in Kashipur, of a movement that has failed because Utkal Aluminium, Birla company, is now making the mining there. Agya, what do you mean by development? How can it be development to mine millions of years old mountains for profits for a few officials for a few years? And this is a Kond in Lanjigar, and many of them say this, we're being flooded out by money. And they also say we cannot eat money. This directly contradicts the Human Development Index way of measuring that, okay, the financial income might have gone up a little bit, but we can't eat money. I mean, they understand because they, with their hands, they grow their food, and then when that's not there anymore, they know they're dependent on a very, very cruel and ruthless corporate hierarchy. This is bauxite mining for Vedanta that's going on in Chhattisgarh, very, very bad conditions where tribals are destroying their own land for labor. This is one of several red mud lakes in Cordoba, where Vedanta's factories are. Red mud is never ever supposed to leach into water supplies, and here you can see it's just doing that. And mining happiness was their first slogan. It's quite an appropriate slogan. They are mining happiness, literally. This is in Cordoba again. You can imagine how drinkable that river is now. Many factories in Cordoba, and many coal mines like this one. Many people still perceive tribal cultures as backward, underdeveloped, yet Adivasi societies are actually very highly developed, especially in this thing of real sustainability, which is long-term, and in sharing as opposed to competition, including communal or shared as opposed to private property. One of the interesting things about the Niyamgiri Gram Sabhas was they not only refused mining, they refused to have private plots of land. The FRA, as some of my tribal friends say, it's, you know, justice at last, but it's also reducing the forest to private plots of land. It's privatizing it. Well, one of the strongest values, as Marx, for example, the word communist comes from communal land ownership. So, you know, tribal societies are primitive communism, or they are real communists, in a way more real than any you would get anywhere else. And competition as a value, I was hearing somebody talking about the education, promotion of competition. In economics, you say competition is good. In politics, competition is good. Why? Actually, Adivasi culture has this strong tradition of democracy, and it does not, there is no competitive voting there. It's consensus. Everybody has to agree. In sport, they don't have competitive sports, or they didn't until they're promoted by the mining companies. What they have is dance. And who is a winner, who is a loser in a dance? I mean, if you think of it, dancing is very, very, very exciting. I don't know, I can't see the kind of dancing that happened last night when people are invited and they do on the stage for money. It's not the same thing. Real dance is passionate meeting of communities together. And instead of fighting and competing, they're dancing. This is high development, if you like. So a lot of what is called development has destroyed and is destroying very complex, highly evolved economic and social systems that were sustainable in the true sense of the long-term future. Thinking of hundreds of years ahead, I mean, I think the world's economists are really probably planning that this world will no longer exist in 50 years or so. I've actually seen articles like that, because we see the new motorways and we think, how wonderful. But we're not seeing the cost of it, of where all that material is coming from. The devastated water systems, and above all the wars, because mining, above all, serves the arms industry and the war industry. So this is the book I wrote on the aluminium industry. Producing 1 ton of steel consumes and pollutes over 40 tons of water. So India's rapidly rising steel production is devastating water sources for farmers. So, you know, at the heart of economic growth is rising steel, exactly like Chairman Mao did. But the devastation of the communities, the devastation of India's future environmental well-being is being destroyed. 40 tons of water for 1 ton of steel, over 1,000 tons of water to produce 1 ton of aluminium. So America, Britain, we aren't making aluminium anymore. Why? Because it's much cheaper and better to get other countries to devastate their communities and ecosystems. And it's like what they call, it's a kind of colonialism, enclave colonialism, where that's how the aluminium industry has developed. There's an amazing book written by a top American aluminium expert saying, America, the United States can no longer afford to pollute our environment, and because the subsidy, if you understand the economics of aluminium, it's all in terms of subsidized prices, and the profits are being made by the foreign companies. From bauxite mines, a conveyor belt takes bauxite to an aluminium refinery, where trains or lorries take it to an aluminium smelter. These factories depend on electricity and water from dams, coal-fired power stations, supplied by captive coal mines, and so on. So what was a forest with tribal villages that have been there since history began becomes a polluted wasteland. And this is the diagram. If you see the bauxite mine, the refinery, then the smelter, and then the big dams and the power stations and the coal mines. So you have to understand the steel or aluminium industry. I mean, every student, really, whether you're a student of history, economics, sociology, you should start by understanding the industrialization process, really. And because some of my ancestors in Britain were some of the leaders of that industrialization process, I feel in me a kind of coming back in time, like really understanding the impact of this at a personal, at a historical, at an economic level. If you look at Nalco's bauxite, which is India's biggest mine, the tribal villages below it are in devastating poverty, and the land around it is like a desert. It's what was rich forest has become, what we're calling development is often creating wastelands. This is a book by Richard Heinberg, The End of Growth, Adapting to a New Economic Reality. The economic crisis that began in 2007 was both foreseeable and inevitable, and it marks a permanent fundamental break from past decades, a period when most economists adopted the unrealistic view that perpetual growth is necessary and possible. So is economic growth actually desirable? Considering its costs, many of the heterodox economists say very strongly no. Marxists, like the mainstream, they will say, yes, of course, economy is the base of development and whatever. So what we're considering normal depends on a vast consumption of resources. Above all, the mainstream model of development being imposed in tribal areas is oriented to war. And if you look at the Maoist conflict, the sandwich theory, I mean, the sandwich reality, obviously, Adivasis, if you speak to them in Buster, they're squeezed from both sides, that both the Maoists and the police will punish them for collaborating with the other. So among the worst resource conflicts are obviously Raugat in Chhattisgarh, Kandahar and other in Orissa, Saranda in Jharkhand. That's just some of the biggest forests that are being converted in iron ore mines. So in many ways, as I said in the beginning, the Maoist conflict is really a resource war. Both sides mask that fact. Certainly much of the recent expansion in deployment of armed police is funded through foreign investment. Mao caused the world's worst famine by the Great Leap in 1958. We can never get a frank critique of the mining industry. We will never get it from people who call themselves after Mao. This is a book about that resource war in Jharkhand. So then this is where, I don't want to take much more time, maybe another 5 minutes, is that okay? Obviously electricity is one of the biggest things. How much does India need? And this is such a, there is no answer to that question because we followed a model of development where how many lights are on in a city like Hyderabad during night? How many million lights? And here we're not using natural light, we're using these lights. It's such an overconsumption of resources has become normal for us. And then the energy coming from, especially coal, also hydropower, which are the most displacing for tribals, and nuclear power. How many people know this waterfall or have been there or know where it is? Can anybody put up a hand? It's Kandahar in North Orissa, and it's the range of mountains there. It's Orissa's tallest waterfall. It's personally the most amazing place I know in the world, and it's sacred to the Pauri Bhuya tribe from there. This is the bottom, it falls into this amazing pool, and this is the top of it, and already the mining there. When POSCO was planning its steel plant, I don't know how many of you remember, there was a big furor in the papers. POSCO didn't want to make a steel plant in Orissa. They wanted the manganese and the iron ore. They are already getting it. The whole thing of the POSCO steel factory was a kind of sham, but what's really being exported already, the Kurmital mines, controlled by quite powerful political interests, it wasn't even touched by the Shah Commission. It's one of the most corrupt and biggest iron ore mines in Orissa. And already the waterfall is getting less. The villages around there, the water has dried up. These are dependent on water deliveries in such a water-rich area. So CBA, how can we do a genuine cost-benefit analysis? When economists, they discount what cannot be measured. And as we all know who deal with tribal things, you cannot measure happiness, you cannot measure quality of life, you can measure water flow, but it's so distorted the way it's measured. This is the Vedanta factory when they began to make it, with Nyamgiri behind. And the Dongria herding their cattle on the top. Amazing trees going up the mountain. The Dongria you will know by now. And this is what is being produced, the nice shiny aluminium that we all depend on in so many uses now, but the biggest use is for the arms industry. So, study the aluminium industry worldwide has shown it's orchestrated by a cartel, which means an informal, non-legal monopoly that controls prices. It's run by the world's most powerful financial institutions, with sections of governments and armed companies that promote war and conflict as a business. So, you know, this is what's happening in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan is very, very relevant to, because a lot of the metals are being exported for that. This cartel ensures that promises of prosperity in mining and aluminium producing regions can never be realized due to the so-called externalities, externalizing the real cost of production onto local areas through keeping the prices for bauxite, labor, electricity, water, transport very low and immersing governments into unrepairable debt. I saw the World Bank deal with the government of Orissa for the year 2000, and it's unbelievable, the amount of debt. The policy of Orissa is completely controlled by the World Bank, IMF. In fact, all the state governments, in fact, the central government, it's no major policy decision is taken without approval of the IMF, because they're controlling the investment in all these different ways. So India's aluminium, like its steel production, is rising rapidly, but what are the costs for all the communities and ecosystems? I'm not going to dwell on this, but if you look at the rapid rises in world finance for mining, it's unbelievable. If you look at the below thing, just the latest analysis of the aluminium refinery costs, that book you can buy for $19,000. I don't think it'll be in the library here. It's okay. So just coming, speculation, how it's hedge funds, amazing. The real BlackRock is the world's largest asset management fund. It's the largest investment in all the world's mining companies. It's controlling the world economy. So when the Prime Minister went to America on his first visit in 2014, certainly Larry Fink was the most important person he met there. But Larry Fink also controls drone technology and many other things. So coming to the end now, anybody know what mountain this is? This is Gandhamardan, and they built a whole city for people to work there, but then a movement managed to stop the bauxite mining in 1986. And that city is still there, the trees have grown quite nicely, but nobody ever lived there. And it's a wonderful waterfall. These are some of the activists from Kashipur who came there. And this is Karlapat, where Vedanta wants to mine. This is what it looked like around Panchmatmali before. The fertility around these big mountains is or was unbelievable. And now you've seen in the other pictures what happens to it when it's mined. This is a traditional Kon village, very remote, below Karlapat. Very beautiful. And then these are the wastelands where... So the Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth was brought by many Adivasis from the world. It's like, we the people, the nations of Earth, considering we're all part of Mother Earth, as an indivisible living community, hereby declare inalienable rights of Mother Earth. It was made in an editorial in EPW, but most people don't know about this. It's more important in a way than the rights of indigenous peoples, and how indigenous peoples stand up for the rights of Mother Earth and nature. So this is in the heart of Niyamgiri again. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed.
Felix, thank you. I think maybe because I had no sleep yesterday night, there was some confusion. In between there is one presentation, that is a presentation of innovative projects taken by the administrators, which of course is not listed in the list of participants with titles of presentation. So, nobody is getting there in between. Time is given in between. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. This is in between. That discussion. So now, Avik, if you can take a little shorter time, we can catch up with. Thank you. Maybe about 15-20 minutes.
Okay. Remodeling the tribal economy, small-scale practices in large-scale policies. The blitzkrieg of media bulletins, the glare of urban images, and the growing wealth among a larger number of the population seems to blind us to the fact that the original definition of the tribe showed them to have multiple economic systems. It was thus not a surprise to see them follow a multiple, some would say plural, economic system. Needless to say, many tribals have started following a more mono-economic way of life, but many have not stopped their earlier practices. This is what we forget when we create economic opportunities for the tribes. Usually a singular mode of economy is promoted at a time, thus ignoring or suppressing other economic possibilities. Some of these possibilities do not exist on paper, but only become apparent from cognitive maps of decision-making processes in particular cases. This is what was the idea behind the decision of the first tribal governor of Jharkhand, Draupadi Murmu, who refused to pass changes to two important land acts which were in effect from the early 1900s, the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act of 1908 and the Santhal Pargana Tenancy Act of 1949. In her interview published in Down to Earth, dated 16 to 31st August 2017, she said, "Three things are needed for development: education, money, and power. But tribals only have land. They feel that when land is there, they can work and will be able to live. But if land is taken away, tribals will not be able to survive. They consider land as God. For centuries, tribal people have been closely linked with their lands, forests, and rivers. It has always been their way of life. To alienate them from this ecosystem would be a crime. Development agenda should not lose sight of this fact. Tribal communities should not be alienated from their lands." Now, tribals in India, or Adivasis as they are known in the country, have their own modes of assertion. Tribal movements have been recorded by anthropologists right from the very beginning of anthropological work in India. They exhibit dissatisfaction with current policies of a regime, especially relating to land issues. The other issue is that tribes have their own aspirations just like other human beings. They hear and interact with others around them, see things on media, and look for other modes of existence too. This cannot be denied. However, from wherever human beings come, they always look to their past and create a sameness and a difference between them and others. Even as they look at others' aspirations and often make it their own, they also look at these samenesses and differences. It is when they look at their past that they attempt to not only identify with it, but also to emulate it as far as they are able to. Our mode of development in India, coupled with systems of positive discrimination, attempts to deal with any systemic and social inequalities in the long run. For many, the objections have come through as blanket benefits are given to all tribals without regard for whether some tribals are genuinely needing such benefits or not. Eventually, many keep getting multiple shares of benefits while others are still bereft. It is this that Atal in 2016 was attempting to dissuade future development programs from doing. Many others do not agree with this. The trajectory of these ideas is what this research paper will discuss, traversing through tribal policy, individual cases studied in the field, as well as the literature that throws up interesting new issues relating to development. Now, if we look at the tribal policy, before we look at the tribal policy, we'll need to look at some of the other policies that are there. For instance, I'll just give one example right now. All academics working on tribes are well aware of the recent tribal policy formulated by the government of India. Many other policies also impinge on them. Now, some of the more controversial parts of the national forest policy are dealt with here. The first is the issue that hilly and mountainous areas may not be required to maintain 2/3 of the geographical area under tree cover. A minimum of 1/3 forest cover is mandated by law. The levy of a green tax To help cope with the finances relating to forestry is another idea that has been mooted. And this act also undermines the Forest Rights Act in many ways. It allows for the formation of a system of joint management of forests that would bring the forest officials back into power. Also, this kind of management would be a means to allow for enough wood to be produced for the wood industry. Sound ecotourism models would aid local communities to generate livelihoods. Climate change was to be an important part of policy. Forest lands diverted by industry were to attract the payment of CAMPA funds, which would aid the local foresters to buy up land for creating corridors for wildlife. So these are the issues that impinge on tribal policy from the forest policy. Now, the first of the issues relating to these is the idea of the tribe itself when we come to the national tribal policy. And the basic definition was used initially by the Lokur Committee in 1965, but much has changed. And so if we look at, I know all of us know about these issues, so I'm not going to go into the detail about why we think that the tribal, naming of a tribal is such a crucial matter, and defining them is a very, very important task. The whole idea of what is a tribal is a very important part of the policy, and the policy does not talk about this at all. The second is the fact that this draft policy does seem to go around the issue of self-governance and autonomy. While these issues are mentioned, it is still noted that the governor may promulgate decisions regarding the tribe at his discretion, in spite of the existence of the TAC, or the Tribes Advisory Council. Now, such TAC existed not only in the 5th schedule areas, but also in other areas. The executive powers of the state could also control and guide the decisions. So the third is the issue of the dehumanization and freedom from structured inferiority status, often seen among the denotified and nomadic tribes. A recent move to have a separate policy for them is lauded, and only one part of the act, a very small section, talks about this issue without linking it up with the other related policies. Fourth, it may be seen that another 8% or more tribes are classified so by anthropologists, but they are still not in the scheduled tribes category. In fact, the Gujars claim that there are a total of 10% all over India. Now, including other groups which have supposedly broken off from the Gujars in the past. If you put all of this together, the the percentage of scheduled tribes all over India could well be above 25%. And this is perhaps why the government is delaying announcing a clear policy or clear mandate on who is to be a scheduled tribe or not. Even as other communities are being dragged into the whole idea of positive discrimination. And I will look into the politics of that positive discrimination itself. Now, sixth is the issue that certain tribes have been classified as being so low down on the scale of development that they warrant special programs. And there is a lot of controversy over the naming of this community, this set of 75 tribal groups. And the draft policy attempts to divide these communities into two groups based on their degree of isolation. The more isolated ones are in terms of human contact or residing in isolated ecological conditions to be called heritage tribes to separate from the rest. And according to Srivastav in 2014, instead of these methods, one may just call them tribes requiring urgent attention from the state. And since the idea of differential tribal contact with other communities is extremely doubtful, if not wrong. The other aspect of the demarcation of tribal powers was seen not only with the community development blocks being converted to integrated tribal development blocks in tribal dominated areas. We may see that there is some kind of a method by which power can again be re-devolved back to the top. And many of the governors have been utilizing that process. And so eventually especially in fifth schedule areas, the governor is completely in control, and it was one comment made by some of the government officials that the fifth schedule was given to those tribes whom we felt were not deserving of getting or were not capable of having self-rule. And also because some of these communities we felt needed to be controlled or needed to have some kind of an overview by others outside. So on the other hand, 6 schedule areas have been very successful in having control given to tribals over many issues. Now there is a lot of controversy over this also, because we not only have tribals living in those areas, but there are minority other groups who are living in those areas who are in majority in other parts of India. And some of them have been living there for over 100 years. And so to call them as being outsiders really hurts not only their sentiments, but also their identities, and a lot of politics is playing around this issue. The PESA, the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule have all had these issues, and I'll now go to the Oraon case to show how we have plural economic systems playing around in every tribal group. Now, the Oraon usually were known to be agriculturists, something that is noted in their mythology, and it is claimed that they were the first agriculturists, sometimes contested by the Mundas of the same region, who claim that one of their clan names is about agriculture having been started by them. Whatever be the prehistory of agriculture, the fact remains that the Oraon have their main occupation as agriculture, but they carry out other modes. I would prefer to call them having plural economies rather than having many different kinds of livelihood. Livelihood happens to be a more limiting term, while economy is a kind of practice of behavior that is applicable to all kinds of social living, which is a definition I pick up after Firth. Livelihood divorces this act of survival from cultural practices, thus isolating it as something to be targeted. The Oraon in the 15 villages that I studied in 3 districts were also keen to fish at odd intervals, especially a few weeks before the water dries out in the seasonal rivulets and after a heavy bout of rain. Usually they would have enough food throughout the year from their agriculture. The growing seasons were divided into 3 parts. There was a summer crop and a winter crop in most fields. In the most low-lying fields, there was an adequate water for a quick intermediate harvest of rice. Very little horticulture was grown by early Oraons. This is attested by early historical writings from even about 100 years back. Their food used to be quite bland, often with very few locally found leaves and so on. It was after this period that they learnt more about vegetables and grew them as something to eat in their kitchen gardens. Vegetable industry and a demand for them grew so much that this kitchen garden grew into a rupees 10 lakh per annum business in the 1980s to a multi-crore business for some Oraons. The engine of this push were big business operatives with a cold storage chain operating from either Bada Bazar in Kolkata or from Rourkela in Odisha. Not everyone was able to deal with taking loans from the bank and repaying them in time. The bank classified a majority of them as bad and doubtful. However, a look at the Oraon economy shows how this happened. In the late 1980s and the early 1990s, the village had a very low monetization, and its average income ranged from rupees 2,300 to about rupees 4,000 per annum per family. This might seem to be ridiculously low by our standards, but the Oraons needed money only for sugar, kerosene, clothes, diesel, for the lamps lit in their houses, and any other item relating to schooling. The rest was managed through exchanging some volume of rice with the product needed by using a local system of weights and measures. At a pinch, even these items, except for the person selling diesel and kerosene, would barter their items for some rice. Some households had one individual working either in the government or private sector. Thus, they were receiving a regular salary, increasing their family income. Others would work in the slack agricultural season at part-time jobs. They would either work at odd jobs or in labor. Some would go to other areas and cities to work for some time. If enough labor was available at home, they would look for a job for a longer period in some other and more lucrative region. Hunting and gathering from nearby forests was of course done at different times for different reasons, and wild animals for hunting were now rare. Rabbits and other small mammals were hunted as a ritual, especially to keep every generation's hunting skills intact. Other things required from the forest included wood, especially for the winter, fruits and mahua, sabai grass, as well as red ochre or limestone for color used in rituals or for painting their houses. They also pick up herbs or insects to be used as medicines. Today, some of the needs of the household, like a bicycle or other costly items, are gifted to them during marriage, either as bride price or as dowry. Some economic relations are taken care of by a fairly simple system of labor sharing during transplanting, cutting of crops, making a house, fishing, and so on. In other words, if one were to classify this whole process, it would be difficult to place it in any kind of a context that as a single kind of livelihood pattern. This is what I mean when I say it is an economic system that is part of a much larger system of relations. Economic behavior may range from being monetized to non-monetized or just as an extension of family relations. So a policy that fits all is the need of the hour, and there are some anthropological observations. It must be seen that the policy of PVTGs and nomadic pastoralists and other tribes would only have an existence in the context of the general idea of what constitutes a tribe in the tribal policy. The development of all these tribes would only be seen in the context of the idea of development seen in the economic policy. So they all need to be integrated. The idea of development is also rooted in a Victorian concept of evolutionism that is pejorative, demeaning, and downright patronizing. Anthropologists have been against such a form of development, and sometimes one needs to remind people of it. Sometimes it is claimed by anthropologists that globalization and other recent trends are the new reality, and it would be better for anthropologists to let go of their ideals and accept the world as it is. However, this may be the only way we may be able to talk of the truth of what choices are being taken by humans. This is especially so in the light of the way large-scale economies and modes of globalization have started to break up into local entities, fueled by local level and regional needs and policies. This has become true in large-scale global polities as well as in the Indian context. In the past, the classificatory act of newly formed state systems pushed groups of tribals into becoming communities having a name. It is this reason that led so many of the tribes to have terms for themselves that mean humans or people in their own language. Many states could not even extract a tax from these subjects and had to be satisfied with a much smaller tribute, as was the case in Jharkhand. Having formed a community, the identities of these communities developed within ensured the creation and reproduction of community borders and barriers. Local concepts of ownership and usufruct rights became slowly part of a larger whole that had a wider acceptance. Now, competing states, use the very idea of identity of these communities as a means of demarcating state boundaries and borders, as well as to create systems of allegiances against enemies. I'll skip through some more of the cases that will develop this idea to look at one very important aspect that gives me the idea for this model that we are developing for our own selves. It is also true that the tribes are not just being exploited by those from outside, they are also being exploited by their own brethren. This has been repeatedly commented about by different people of the time, right from the 1950s in government policy analysis. Thus, tribal areas are not systematically being exploited by a class of capitalists, as has often been claimed. Agricultural contracts are also taken up by tribes, and many of them made a better way of life by working in different coal fields and other mines. Mines opened areas out by building roads and having transportation. Using this money, at least some of the tribes bought land, an old process since it exists in the customary laws. In many areas, neither was all the money allocated to tribal spent, and also since the tribal areas in places like Jharkhand were mixed populations in the tribal development blocks, the money was mostly spent on the non-tribals. The 1960s and 70s destroyed the old ethno-regionalism, speeded up economic transformations, and thus there was decline of the idea that there was a dominant tribal heritage behind the setting up of Jharkhand. Some people see an emergent class politics in the region. However, this ignores the fact that individuals as well as groups could use both ethnic as well as class support to gain better advantages. So such state programs for tribes were both resources as well as sources of attack for ethnic communities. So in Jharkhand, ethno-regionalism emerged at its peak when benefit schemes for tribes were given the most by the state. Thus the influx of people coming in and the benefits given to tribes by the state caused different parts of the state to behave differently with respect to politics as well as economics. Looking at current trends today, we see that there are ways by which we may relate the way positive discrimination has been used by the government. I've called this the Uber surge model of positive discrimination. Uber, the global app-based cab company, increases fares whenever the need for cabs grows beyond its capacity. Using this method, it claims more drivers get better income, and so they are attracted to joining up during periods of high surge pricing. Today, this has become the basis or reason why so many communities wish to be included within those groups that get positive discrimination. It is also the backbone for today's political elites who have made a business out of discrimination, both positive and negative. Even Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 areas have had so many cases where those in government jobs refuse to move out of the locality because they would lose their benefits. With this in mind, it must be remembered, where are we going with positive discrimination? Is it to be continued forever as the political elite wish, including more of the wealthy elites than those who actually need them? Or is it for a limited period? By what logic do we continue? Finally then, I fully agree that there needs to be multiple level consultancies where every level of people would be required to be included, beginning with anthropologists, bureaucrats, NGOs, other change agents, and so on with the stakeholders. Further, we need to upgrade our conception of a tribe. Deciding what we want and playing up to greed may not be development. We need to look at what anthropology has taught us about the critique of the whole process of development itself. We may need a better model of community assistance that gives better benefits without becoming debilitating. As Dominic Lapierre in The City of Joy stated, a Santa Claus immobilizes you, an exploiter forces you to react. Many communities add on positive discrimination, loan waivers, free electricity, free access to resources as a part of their economy. Such people need to be weaned from thinking of it as a source of permanent income, as an entitlement in perpetuity. Some of the tribes have been even claimed that it should be given in perpetuity, since the rest of the population have always discriminated against them. The economy of individual households is a much bigger concept than is livelihood generation, monetization, or even income generation. Targets may only show a surface reality, as was seen in my fieldwork among the Birhors, who could not accept the new buildings or the cattle gifted to them. These did not match up with their way of life, but the use of plastic threads to make ropes, nylon, high tensile webbing for catching animals, suited them well. It must be remembered that hunting, gathering, and pastoral communities have had a long-term relationship with other kinds of economies of other peoples. Each thus interpenetrates into the economy of the surrounding population. Some economic modes used by tribes are less legal than others, and so blindly allowing them modes of life that damage others may not be good. These include illegal sale of animals, plants, wood from forests, participating in criminal activities, or as goons for local criminal gangs, and so on. We need to rethink our greed-based model of positive discrimination based on the Uber surge model. Our governments are beginning to think about how to curb such practices in industry. How about in the concept of development itself? How about those others who participate in the greed industry of discrimination perpetuating it for politics and votes. Development entices. It attracts people and pulls them by their aspirations over other ways of life. Thus, development programs can deftly manage migration or make it go haywire. In the Jharkhand context, all of these things have happened. Finally, we need to look within. To what extent are we being paid because we are part of the development industry? Whether as academic consultants, staff, researchers, NGOs, administrators, industry, or even tribal. If so, then can we ever become true critics of a system that supports our existence? How many of the problems that we describe in such gatherings are because of our tacit acquiescence of them? Thank you.
I can understand because the subject is so engrossing and we have a tendency to involve so much, but time is so short that we have. So because it will reduce time for discussion, which I think is the most important thing for all of us. And I'm sorry for saying this. I think next we have a small presentation on innovative projects by administrators. This will be presented by Mr. G. Pavan Kumar of Coisen. It's a skill development company. I would request if you can slightly compress your time so that we'll have time for the others to comment upon and then can have discussion.
Sure, sir. So, can I know how much time I'll be given?
How much time? Because what is given is now it's difficult to continue with that.
Okay, 15 minutes?
10 minutes, if you can compress it, is wonderful.
Okay, at 10 minutes should be fine. And if possible, I could understand that the discussion activity as well is there apart from the presentations. So, if there is any possible, I'll cut down 2-3 minutes of my presentation, and I wanted some discussion to be happening on what we are trying to give. Okay, so in that way, if you can extend it to 15, I'll be really good. Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Pavan. I could see I'm a kind of an odd man out of this whole community of the people who are present here. So I belong to a different segment. We are neither academicians nor administrators. We are rather people from the corporate. So we actually are into IT development, skill development. We are into a skill development company. Okay. So I'll try to give brief about what we are trying to do, there are certain projects at an organization level we are trying to do, and what is that we have understood and what models can be evolved through that. So we are partner of SIPs and we have been working closely with them in different models. I'll try to present what are the models which we are working as well. Okay. So bear with me for 10 minutes. I'll try to be quick and try to be more interactive. So this is what we have thought from our side, being a company who is into skill development. We are into the corporate side who is finding difficult for the right kind of people to be adopted, to be taken into the corporate. Certain issues or challenges which are there across the strata, and since we are talking about the context of tribal people, these are in a way are becoming very big problems. I'll start with the first one. Yes, there are a lot of schemes, plans that have been planned, proposed by the government, various schemes by the industry as well through CSR programs. The academicians as well are coming up with different models. But at the end of the day, though they are being implemented, the impact they are supposed to be creating at the end eventually is livelihood, creating a livelihood, creating a job opportunity or opportunity to earn money is not happening at the same pace. This we felt is the biggest challenge that is happening right now. This is the point number one we have taken. And then when we go in deep and try to understand why this is happening is the aptness of a skill imparting, a training program, a kind of any scheme as such. They have put skilling as such, any scheme that has been proposed or implemented, particular for a set of people, is not apt to their needs. So I felt very happy because I have been there in the session since yesterday. There are quite a few speakers, in fact, very reputed and well-known people, experienced people who have been talking about how the programs that have been implemented not in line with what the requirements is. I could see that and things which Sir as well has spoken. So this aptness has become very key even at the program implementation level, because they have been undergoing the program, at the end of the day they are not happy. So what it is resulting in? Conversion of enrollment to a certification, since I am talking about a skill, but as such any program, to finally resulting in an employment or a livelihood is not happening the way it is supposed to be happening. There is a lot of dropouts. The way we talk about school dropouts, the program dropouts has been very rampant. I am sure if there are any government officials who have been monitoring schemes, they would agree with me with the kind of one of the biggest problem which there is there. And the next important thing is mobilization itself. With people being so scattered, they are not there in a particular location, easily able to capture, and again, in line with their requirement, in line with the program. The mobilization has become a very big problem for any program to be implemented, and making them understand why the program is relevant for them. The overall cycle itself, because once they adopt, once they accept this is need of the hour for them, then the final implementation will be very successful. We need not really push them to be attending the program, we need not push them to be taking it up seriously, they will be taking it up by themselves. That's what we believe in. And finally, the important thing is the policy making, the planning is happening on the sample data. I'm sure it's a kind of a very big statement when I'm talking before academicians, research people, because they rely on the sample data. Of course, how detailed the sample data is, that will decide the output of the program. But being a corporate people, what we believe in, we should be working on the actual data. So yes, the problem of capturing the actual data, complete data, becomes a very big problem, because the amount of data will be huge. But with the kind of data analytics that are happening right now, data science being growing right now, we don't see a big problem there with that, because with the Amazon, IBM, Watsons of the day who are working on that, we can really turn around with respect to these solutions. So today we are trying to do these of the points. These are the points which we really wanted to talk quickly, and to address this, what is the model we are trying to propose. That's what we are trying to do here. So before me going further, let me give you a brief about what we are, what kind of organization we are, what we have done. So we actually are a decade-old organization working in the area of IT, skill development, software development, and we understand the exact training needs of a graduate, of a student, of an aspirant who is looking for a next level of career aspirations. So we have been working closely in that. So we have been associated with National Skill Development Corporation, we have been associated with our Center of Innovation for Public Systems, we have been associated with AP State Government, Telangana State Government. We have been working on all different skill missions happening through government at different state level and at a center level. So if you can just move on. So these are the partners we are. I would like to talk about the UNDP program. We actually are the UNDP implementation partner for Telangana state, and the model which I am talking today is predominantly based on the what model we have been implementing with UNDP across Telangana state. So and then there is the presence across the country we have. We are now, this is basically because the opportunity we got to present before you all is because of SIPs and MAM. So these are the associations, these are the plans which we have, which we are working through. We are trying to work on aspiration and skill analysis, connecting the youth to the right career opportunity. In fact, the model which we are trying to present today is basically on that. And then building a labor management system for better governance, skill development programs, trying to connect, because today the last mile delivery is the order of the day for any corporate. They no longer see reaching the urban people is the key for the growth of them, because they are reaching their saturation levels. They wanted to reach out to the rural people, the last mile. That is where we can really tap the people, the talent which is there in the rural level, completely at a last mile level, and use them as a delivery persons across that particular community. That's where we are trying to come up with a model of e-Podosi through which we can really connect to them. That's still in the advanced stage, and we are of course the technology partner for the SIPs. Now, let me directly get into what we are trying to propose here. We are trying to propose a career guidance and counseling centers. I know I'm not talking something new. It is not something new which I'm talking about. Only the approach, only the way we are trying to do is the differentiating factor. Because I know there are quite a few programs which have been attempted in that. We wanted to utilize that existing network and setup which is there right now and try to do the process. Now, the basic heart of this program is the skill versus aspirational exercise, which we call. What we mean by skill versus aspirational exercise is there have been quite a few programs, quite a few methodologies that have been evolved over the year where an individual skill has been assessed, evaluated or imparted through programs. But what we feel is lacking is when the skill has been evaluated, it is evaluated with a preconceived notion. Preconceived notion that let me check whether he suits a IT industry, whether he suits a job of a manager, whether he suits a job of a clerk, whether he suits a job of a receptionist, or whether he suits a job of a simple village officer, whatever it is. So everywhere there's a preconceived notion without really understanding what is that individual is aspiring for. Now the whole exercise which we are trying to do is, it is not just to do the skill assessment, understand the aspiration part of the individual and try to connect skill and the aspiration of the individual and then try to do that. If you can go on. This is what we are trying to do. So move on. So this is what we call as the onboarding process. The onboarding process is where we will need support from the education system. If it is talking about outside the education system, like the dropouts or the passouts or the graduates, the YTC centers which we have under ITDA, the existing institutions, be it the ashram schools, be it the residential schools or the colleges who are catering to the needs of the people. They are the people through whom we will try to identify all the people across this category of people and then try to do a skill versus aspiration exercise for them. Go to the next one. This is what we are trying to do. When we are trying to do a skill versus aspiration exercise, it is a detailed analysis through a psychometric analysis, an aptitude test, language and a domain. And I am talking about though the names are big, it is very much specific to the audience who are going to be attending the program. Because we clearly understand a graduate's assessment should be in a different level from a 10th passed out or a kind of a very semi-literate or a completely illiterate who have a natural skill. So once that is done, it is not just the assessment which we are trying to do, we are trying to gather the information of the individual at a personal, social, economical information and try to do an aspirational exercise. Once we have this information, this is where our centers will come into picture, where we are going to have a guidance and counseling. Because what we have seen is, there are quite a few opportunities which have been already available, which have been created by the existing system. But how much of that information is passed on to these people in a right way, by motivating them, by making them understand that this particular need of yours is scattered by this particular system. That connection is what is really missing. If we can really do that part using a very systematic manner, making them realize, because like the information is already available, that is there, but the exercise of making them understand that this information is relevant for them is the key here. Once we do that and then make them understand that this particular scheme, it could be a simple training program of a mobile repair. It could be a simple program of making him kind of a village health officer. But at the end of that, we have to identify who can suit that particular job, who can become that change agent for that particular village and make them do that and through them try to pick that. For that, the exercise should happen and it has to happen on a regular basis or a continuous basis. So what we do once we have the data, this is what we are trying to do based on the aspirations, skills required, jobs required, information required, careers opted. Because apart from taking the information from the individual, there is a parallel exercise which should happen, which we do at a what you call opportunity side level. We try to do the analysis of understanding various programs, job opportunities, not necessarily at a urban level, at a local level, at a very within their village level, what are the various options that are available and try to connect them there. Because one thing we really understand is, especially for the tribal and the rural people, they coming out to the city and do an urban place and then getting settled there for a meager job of 5,000 or 10,000 is a big thing. Instead of that, you give them 5,000 within their place, they'll be more than happy. So that is what we have to understand and connect. And then across the sector, across the geography and gender, we are trying to do this analysis. Once we have this data, Then the analysis starts. We try to go and talk to each and every people who can give them that opportunity, connect them to them. It is that cycle which happens both at a seeker's level who is actually looking for a better opportunity, at the provider's level who is trying to provide better opportunities, who is also finding it difficult to have right kind of people. So this is trying to do an exercise where from both sides we are trying to do the analysis and try to connect them both. That's what we are trying to do. So this is what we try to do. We provide the information of the government schemes, of the job opportunities, career opportunities through these centers to the people and make them really understand what are the various options that are available and then try to help them choose. So when we are talking about this kind of exercise at a scale, we cannot do it without using the intervention of a technology. That's where the technology comes into picture. We are going to build a platform and which can really do the assessment part, counseling part, do the connector. It will become the skill connector, corporate connector. Even we are trying to talk with a lot of corporates who are trying to pledge their mentors for a connect. So this is what the outcomes which we are actually looking at. The basic outcome which we are looking at is identification of readily employable resources. This is one surprising outcome because this whole exercise which I am talking about right now, we are doing it for 25,000 girl students across Telangana government degree colleges, where we are trying to do a skill assessment, understand their aspiration and trying to connect them to the corporates. We are doing this exercise. We have already completed counseling for almost 8,000 people. And the remaining people we are in the process. And we could really generate more than 1,500 job leads which we are trying to connect it to these people. And when we are trying to do this exercise, one important thing which we have understood is there are quite a few people who are easily employable with a minimal, minimal job ready skills, minimal grooming. So that is where then you not really go through that scheme where each of the government officers spend 18,000 to 20,000 to 25,000 sometimes. There's a lot of benefit, cost benefit there actually. Unnecessary cost would reduce. The right program for the right candidate, that will obviously improve the conversion ratio right from the enrollment to the employment part. Mobilization as such, there are quite a few skill development programs that are happening across the departments. If we can really provide this information to them, that will be a lot of headache taken out of them so that they can directly focus on implementation of the program. Government policy making, I would say, would happen now on the actual data rather than actually happening on a sample data. This is what we are trying to do. In fact, we are at the very high initial level of talks with ITDA project officer Sitampet to do a pilot project there. So again, ma'am has helped us to connect, SIPS has helped us to connect to Sitampet project officer. We are trying to do a project there, trying to implement it for the tribal youth there in that Sitampet center. It was Mr. Shiva who actually has done the presentation yesterday, who has been very proactive in taking up the things there. So this is the program which we are trying to do because we could see there is a huge gap here. Wherever there are opportunities, the opportunities are not presented in the right way for the seeker. He has been not treated with respect, I would say, because as a person, as a learner, I should want to be at the center of the complete exercise. I don't want to be like a person who is thrown off something and then have to take whatever that is available for me, provided to me. So this is kind of like trying to do that democratization in the overall exercise.
Thank you. We are really running short of time. I now request two of our, please, I can, they'll come back. Because the discussions and after that will come. I would first request Dr. Panda and then Dr. Shivam Krishna. If you can take lesser time, it will be useful for discussion. I'm not asking you to sacrifice time.
We have sacrificed already much time.
Excuse me, sir. So before I close on, so just a small request for you all. We have passed on a simple form for you all. So I'm not sure like which state or particular department you belong to. If there are certain basic questions in terms of skill or exercise which we are trying to do. If you find them to be relevant, please fill it and pass it on to us so that we can actually contact you again.
Thank you, Chair, and also the presenters who made very relevant subject presentations, and also esteemed scholarship and the audience. Before I go for the leading job, which I'm supposed to do, as a prelude, I want to read out something, and you make a sense of it. I mean, you bear with me, I will read it out, and we'll put ourselves in context where we are in. This is Lord Macaulay in 1835, what he said to the British Parliament. He said, "I have traveled across the length and breadth of India and have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief, such a wealth that I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is the spiritual and cultural heritage, and therefore I propose that we replace the old and ancient education system, her culture, for if the Indians think that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation." So this is a prelude, but this is virtually a context that we are living in. Professor Maxwell has said many things and how much it falls contrary to what has been believed and what has been inculcated for the last 1.5 centuries. We are not out of it. Now, we are trying to locate the spirit, the strength, and the knowledge and validity of the cultures of the tribals, which are part of our knowledge always, but this has been replaced. So essentially, when we look at the tribal policy, we have to address this problem, the way we got education to know about the tribals, the way we think that this is the education, the tool that we have to change, we have it in our hand as a capacity to change anybody or anyone in any situation. The very method is at question. Now, if you see, we are not the tribals at large, but we say that we locate tribals in different ways. And as a so-called civilized society, we say that tribals should be this way, tribals should be this way, tribals are this way, and many things we talk about, pro and cons. If you see the global scenario, India is a tribe. If you see the entire global thing, they don't make. The entire thing system is a tribal system in India. So it is from where you speak, about which you speak, and what context you speak about as your preferential knowledge and your power to speak about, and the strength to dictate terms. Now, we have seen many, sorry to take 2 minutes because I couldn't resist speaking for 2 minutes. We have seen today, we have 3 papers. And the subjects dealt is quite wide. And the agenda and the thematics, a theme that is put to us the natural environment. In the course of our beginning to the end, we have gone to many areas tangentially, education, job, and everything. See how we are losing focus. In such an august body who are supposed to contribute to formulation of a policy which is already at a draft stage in 1976. Some of these things which are said has been resaid again and again. So there is a need to change ourselves first, we have to change others. That part comes when you are sharp enough, capable enough, review of our learning process and assess as to what you learn is how relevant and how much is applicable and how much is this geared to outcome as intended to. So in this context, Professor Maxwell has gone to the extent you have seen that he has spoken the Oriya language, or the local language. He was talking. Now, many of our anthropologists go for field work, and very few learn the language. See, the language is a basic medium of understanding, and if you don't, then it's mystic. Like once Wittgenstein said to Bernard Russell that you first raise the dust, and then you claim that you can't see anything. So why to raise the dust? When things are clear, capture them. So now the question is that how good we are in understanding and translating. That is the job we are having. Now, I would, with this remark, I would invite people to put their questions more sharply, more focusedly, the theme that we are in hand. Other questions, although presented, could go to section 3B and 4A, I guess, their education and livelihood. They are more relevant, but misplaced, are out of place. That's what I mean. Let's focus on our time.
Yesterday's, I think my voice is loud enough, to what I experienced and what you're referring to. I had a young woman sitting next to me on the flight, and she said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going for this conference." So she works for Microsoft for the last 10 years. Referring to the model of education, she says, "Do we have tribes in India?" That summed it up for me as to what kind of education system we've had. And my very, very brief, because I want young people to come and talk. We've been saying this for the last 40, 45 years, Professor Patel. But have we been able to reach out? Have we been able to bridge this gap between us and the others? If we can't, then where is that middle path? Because they're not willing to listen to us. They've called us isolationists. They've called us, we've said precisely the same things for the last 40 years. Respect their knowledge system. You can't say, even the concept of welfare itself is so terribly misplaced. We just had these young innovators talking about, and they're not even talking about bringing out models from them as to what kind of knowledge systems they have. Sorry, I think
Dr. Shivaram Krishna will make this thing. Then after that, the house is open. After that, house will be open.
So NGO job is to cooperate, contest, mobilize, train. And when British introduced maps, records, and schedules, for land rights, you should know the survey number. For forest rights, you should know the reserve block, which compartment, range, width. For water, you should understand localization maps. In which college all these are being taught? Unless you know your survey number, you cannot apply properly. Only officers, if they are enter service, then they will learn what is survey, what is land record, and all these things. And I gave 5 examples: David Arnold, Nandini Sundar, and particularly Nandini Sundar is interesting. Subaltern and sovereign. In Bastar, when the Forest Act was introduced, people were opposing it. An officer on special duty was appointed. And whatever you are demanding, they are incorporated in the rules. The officer replied. So open schools, at least one member of our family can learn what are rules. This is the demand by tribals. In which school these rules are being taught? Tell me. So administration is a Veda. particularly revenue forest. It is nobody knows it. Do you know what is the reserve block, how to measure it? Do you know where the first survey number starts, either in Telangana, Andhra? And why we failed to introduce in these things in curriculum? And coming to Mao, Chairman Mao, he introduced in the primary education itself all these things. Why Maoists are not teaching all these things? There is a great question for me. And ultimately I end with a comment by Gayatri Spivak. The failure of the bourgeoisie and the working class to achieve a successful bourgeois democratic revolution, that is the fate of India. We are educated, but we are not educated in administration. For us, administration is delivering. I have money. Yesterday they were telling I have this much schools, I have hostels, I have hospitals, I want money, I will deliver. But there is land, there is natural resources. People don't know the survey numbers. People don't know what is the number, what is the block. And I end up with one comment, cryptic comment. All anthropology students, postgraduate, they go for field study for 20 days. This Forest Recognition of Rights Act, the traditional customary boundary is the unit to recognize. How many students are trained in preparing the customary boundary map during their stay in the field? If you have done it, you know, by this time hundreds of maps have come. You must have you would have standardized all these things. So we missed many opportunities at the cost of the tribal, and they are getting marginalized. Thank you.
I think now the house is open. I request the members to keep their questions very sharp and not to take longer time, so that if the questions are addressed to respective speakers, then they would answer. So I would suggest we will have 5 minutes or maximum 7 minutes for questions. After that, another 2-3 minutes for them, then we'll close it up.
That you have preconceived notions of what are jobs. I think you should reflect more on that, because whatever you are suggesting thereafter is within this preconceived notion of job creation, and that natural skills, or even, I mean, the whole effort to bring the tribals into the market, into the capitalist system. I think that is the capitalist system, is, I think, something which you should also rethink.
Innovations must come from within. Innovations must come from within the community. I think that's the first and fundamental principle.
Myself, Professor Samal, I'm from Argentina. I have one question to Professor Felix, because though it has been told that so many questions have been asked, that this thing, because exploitation has to go. It will be made in tribal areas as well, and that's what's happening in Korap and other places. But so many questions we are putting ourselves. Please tell us 1 or 2 points, some answers to this question, how best we are going to address this question of exploitation and maintain the balance between exploitation and conservation.
My question to Professor Maxwell. This lots of, it's an apocalypse that we are going to head for a catastrophic age. That's the pessimism which driving us to scare. And the question is that how much of that problem that we are able to capture, and how much of that can be addressed, and how much you and I can address, and how much that the tribal themselves can address. That's
Just, just a brief question to the first presentation made by Phil. In fact, in your presentation, every word of it, I am in favor of it and I like it. But the problem is the development debate or development cry is becoming so shrill that any area, tribal area, having so much of the natural resources is a sort of a common interest all over not of the people in this country, outside too. Now, the question is how to save these people and also get little away from this shrill development debate. In this respect, perhaps my experience says we may try to publicize success stories. If there are any, then we should try to say that, look here, there is an alternative path, and those who have taken alternative path, this is the success story. Otherwise, I'm sorry to say that we have been repeating over and over again, and and then we go back satisfied that we had our say, but the life goes on.
Now, would it be wise for us to think or suggest to bring about a moratorium for a certain period of time in mining and all the industrial activities and all that, which is not only affecting adversely to the tribals, but to the environment as such? And would it be possible to prospectively think in terms of a time that the tribals are capable enough to handle themselves as much we think that we are handling them? The capacity of theirs is built to the extent like we talk about their education, they will talk about the education like we do.
In the order of presentation to answer, and then I'll have a last word and then close it. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions and the attention I feel from everybody. Starting with your point on the aspirations, because this is such a crucial thing that is spoken of, and of course your talk is also all on aspirations. The first point to understand is, since the wonderful quote from Macaulay you have written, since that time, and I have similar quotes from the 1830s, the British are really trying to provoke tribal people's aspirations. Buy this, have this, and it is capitalism, as the ladies here were saying. It is how we are manipulating them from A to Z. It's, you know, vast. And through the education system, for example, in Bhubaneswar, the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences has the world's biggest boarding school. We have learnt nothing from what's happened in America, Australia, but then, I mean, finding a balance is very difficult. These are very, very deep debates. You could say it's the debate of capitalism. And on one side, it's not the capitalists and the Marxists and Maoists on the other. The Marxists and Maoists have surrendered long ago. They've become, if you look at China, become part of the capitalist system in even a more ruthless way. The debate is between the capitalists and those people who are still living close to the land, which means, in a way, as I was saying, tribals are the original communists. I mean, I'm afraid all of your work might be trying to break that up, to make them aspire, to make them want more things, to especially convert the ideas of communal ownership into private ownership. But we have to celebrate, and in fact, what you were saying in your talk, and I'm sorry because I spoke too long, you spoke less, but it was the last point especially you were making of the traditional boundaries and how they have not been recognized. It's, you know, this would be real anthropology and we'll work for the Tribal Research Institutes to recognize what are the traditional boundaries where people have for a long time recognized these are our lands. So in terms of the positive you were asking for, there are, of course, a lot of positive stories. Compared to, say, that industrial scale of boarding school, there are many, many small-scale schools that are really trying to balance traditional knowledge with giving literacy, mainstreaming, learning the state language in Hindi, English, whatever, along with trying to make kids proud of their own value and knowledge systems and languages. So, and joint forest management, there are some good examples, of course. There are many good examples in terms of mining. Really, we meet the ultimate polarity that some people just really seeing it as a source of wealth, and because mining and metals is a big driver of the GDP. So, of course, all the economists are going to be on the side of get those minerals moving. But there is, if you know Claude Alvarez and his work in Goa, and how he stopped mining for some years, his movement, but they have got something called a kind of mineral development fund, which is ensuring that the main profits go to the people and communities. So if something like that could come out of India, it would teach the whole rest of the world. But it's very, very hard to oppose those mining interests, and behind them are such strong and such ruthless interests. We have to be aware of that. That's why I was bringing my analysis to understand what is Roskill, what is BlackRock. These are controlling all our lives but their names so far beyond. So anyway, thank you. And yes.
Any question? Any other question?
Not too many things, just two comments that stand out. One is about the whether we stayed on the topic or not. When I initially began and when I was invited, I was told to speak on tribal economy. And so I think we have all stayed on topic by talking about tribal economy in different or a variety of ways. And so I feel that these are different aspects of economy, and that we must understand them not as separate units or separate subunits of something, but as a whole. And it is only then can we go to the next level. The second thing is about education. Yes, we have had problems with the way tribals are educated, or the way we are educated, and the perspectives we are getting through our education system. But one of the things that I remember is that though our education system was in the English medium, in a supposedly convent school in Delhi, what I learned from there was from my own classmates, because of which I started working among the tribals, because many of them were tribal. And from them, I learned about the names, and I became very curious about what those names mean. And eventually, I landed up working among that same community, and I got back in touch with most of my classmates who were from that community, and we form a large group now. So I think, while we are learning a lot of wrong things from education, we are also learning some of the right things about mixing with different kinds of people and different locations and zones, which may be giving us a broader perspective than the one we would be normally used to if we go local with education. The final issue is about whether all of this has a point, whether we can go somewhere with all this. And that's where I think we are a little mixed up. To what extent can we dictate terms from here? I've already stated that we need multimodal consultancies with many different people and the stakeholders to be involved in local acts. And that is where I think.
I think ma'am has left, but still I would try to answer the question. So there's nothing like we trying to do something from outside and try to promote them and push them into the capital sector or something like that. In fact, we were trying to do the anti part of it. Instead of just dumping something onto them, try to understand what their aspirations are and then cater the things which are available in the existing system which are trying to provide them and create that information flow. We wanted to build that information flow relevant to them rather than just provide the information which is available with us. The overall system which we wanted to build is around that, provide the information which they would need basing on their aspiration, their needs, and which are available in the system in terms of providing them some benefits, and try to create that platform so that they can get benefited out of that, not necessarily just put something which is capital centric. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm sorry we crossed our time much beyond. Of course, we can understand there is enthusiasm, and we always try to say as much as possible, and in a given time it is just not possible. What we need is a brevity. We should be sharp and focused, in the sense that when we are dealing with policies relating to natural resources, the kind of contestations, that's what we need to talk about. And because there are sessions where we could go on, and I think what comes to me as a summing up is that the existing policies and existing kind of programs, developmental and other programs, are really not helping the tribal communities, not helping the environment either. And secondly, if we are trying to develop any kind of alternative systems of livelihoods and other things, they should be in tune with the kind of practices and the kinds of livelihoods that they have, or the kind of knowledge that they have, the kind of resources that they have. I think this, in a way, I can't take much time. I'll sum it up. Thank you very much for participating. In fact, Professor P.K. Mishra's question still is something which is not easier, because alternative, some Felix had suggested, but then whether the systems allow us to sustain those kinds of alternatives is the big question. Thank you. Thanks for the organizers, and sorry for the mix-up. Thank you.
I would like to thank the chair, the presenters, and the participants for being here. And we are having tea break now. After that, the session is on tribal policies, livelihoods. And I would like to remind all the presenters of the next session to occupy the front seats and hand over the PPTs to the technical team. Also, those who have not registered, please, and need reimbursement for the TA, please approach the help desk outside. Thank you.